Welcome to this explainer. Look, right now, global security and honestly, the global economy are both kind of hanging by a thread. Today, we're unpacking the insanely complex, high-stakes diplomatic puzzle that is the 2026 Iran peace accord. We're going to look at how a potential deal is actually taking shape right now behind closed doors.
It's a fascinating, almost jarring paradox, isn't it? I mean, how do you negotiate a peace deal while simultaneously dropping bombs? Because right now, the US and Israel are conducting active military strikes on Iranian missile sites and mine-laying boats. But at the exact same time, diplomats are sitting across from each other trying to hammer out a peace agreement. You've got a US naval blockade still in full force, yet both sides are actively swapping draft memorandums. It's this incredibly high-stakes environment where military action is literally being used as diplomatic leverage.
And these dramatically contrasting statements perfectly capture the friction between the public posturing and what's actually happening at the negotiating table. On one side, U.S. President Trump is saying the deal is, quote, largely negotiated, and that the U.S. isn't rushing because time is on their side. But then, on the flip side, you have the Iranian Foreign Ministry warning that contradictory statements from the U.S. are stalling things, explicitly stating that signing an agreement is not imminent. So, everyone is trying to project absolute strength here.
So here's our agenda for today. 1. A fragile ceasefire. 2. The draft memorandum itself. 3. The Strait of Hormuz. 4. Nuclear ambitions and regional proxies. And finally, 5. The regional ripple effects.
Let's jump right into Section 1, a fragile ceasefire testing the boundaries. As outlined in this report from the Congressional Research Service, an initial ceasefire temporarily hit pause on what was a massive, multi-front conflict starting back in April 2026. This pause came after a really intense period of missile and drone attacks. But here is the crucial takeaway. This ceasefire remains incredibly fragile. It's constantly being tested on all sides, and understanding its limits is absolutely key to understanding the immense pressure these negotiators are under. Because the reality on the ground, it's anything but peaceful. Both sides are actively trying to secure leverage through military force. U.S. Central Command is conducting what they term self-defense strikes to neutralize threats, specifically targeting missile launch sites and mine-laying vessels, all while insisting the ceasefire still holds. Meanwhile, there's significant Iranian air defense activity happening near Keshm Island, which is a major strategic choke point in the Gulf. Add to that the intense, ongoing operations by the IDF against Hezbollah in Lebanon and a U.S. naval blockade that is still in full force. This chaotic, volatile backdrop is exactly what the diplomats are working against. Moving on to Section 2, the draft memorandum. What's on the table?
Now, because the U.S. and Iran don't have formal diplomatic relations, a really complex web of mediators has had to step in. It's essentially a massive, coordinated diplomatic dance spanning Doha, Muscat, Beijing, and Tehran, literally just to keep the sides from shooting at each other. Qatar is hosting the high-level peace talks in Doha, bringing Iranian negotiators, including their foreign minister, to the table. Oman, which shares the coastline of the Strait of Hormuz with Iran, is tasked with drafting the crucial maritime transit mechanism. And meanwhile, Pakistan's army chief and prime minister are acting as the primary intermediaries, literally shuttling messages back and forth between Beijing, Tehran, and the U.S.
But when you look at the proposals they're working with, the divide is just vast. According to reports, an earlier U.S. 15-point proposal demands the immediate dismantling of nuclear facilities and the total abandonment of enrichment programs, period. Conversely, Iran's 10-point proposal wants to defer nuclear talks completely for 60 days. Instead, they demand immediate sanctions relief, the unfreezing of assets, and an end to the naval blockade right up front. So, figuring out how to bridge this massive gap is the ultimate challenge for the mediators.
To keep the diplomatic momentum alive, mediators are pushing for a sequenced timeline. Think of this as essentially a way to buy time and kick the absolute hardest problems down the road, just to prevent the talks from collapsing today. Under this draft framework, Day 1 would trigger an immediate 60-day extension of the ceasefire. By Day 30, the goal is for the Strait of Hormuz to reopen, with maritime traffic returning to normal pre-war conditions, alongside the lifting of the U.S. blockade. And only after all of that, at Day 60, would formal, detailed negotiations regarding Iran's nuclear program and highly enriched uranium actually begin. Which brings us to Section 3, the Strait of Hormuz, economic chokehold.
The Strait of Hormuz is absolutely vital. Roughly a fifth of the entire world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows right through it. Why does this matter to you? Well, because if this strait closes, global energy markets go into full panic mode, and inflation will skyrocket at your local gas pump. While the draft aims to resume normal maritime traffic in 30 days, Iran has proposed establishing a joint authority with Oman. They want to charge transiting ships what they're calling navigation service fees to cover coordination and security. But the U.S., they view this as nothing more than an unacceptable toll, a backdoor way for Iran to maintain control over an international waterway.
The U.S. position on this specific issue is absolutely rigid. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explicitly rejected any attempt by Iran to manage or toll the straits, stating categorically that it is an international waterway. The U.S. treats the lifting of its naval blockade as completely contingent on the unconditional, free, and safe passage of commercial vessels. No Iranian permission-based transit regime, and absolutely no fees attached.
Okay, Section 4. Nuclear ambitions and proxies. Intractable layers.
It's crazy, but even the basic facts of what's been agreed upon are publicly disputed. U.S. administration officials have been leaking this optimism to the press, claiming Iran has agreed in principle to dispose of its highly enriched uranium stockpile as part of the wider deal. But Iranian media and officials are vehemently denying making any such nuclear concessions at this stage. They're insisting the current draft focuses purely on ending the immediate war and that nuclear issues are strictly reserved for that 60-day window after they get sanctions relief.
And then we hit the massive hurdle of Lebanon. Iran considers an end to the fighting in Lebanon, a total ceasefire, quote, on all fronts, to be an absolute prerequisite for peace. But this condition is a non-starter for Israel. The Israeli government insists on maintaining its freedom of action to strike Hezbollah so they can secure their northern border. And the U.S. firmly backs Israel's right to defend itself against imminent threats. Meanwhile, Hezbollah refuses to stop fighting until the IDF withdraws from southern Lebanese territory completely. So you have this localized conflict that literally threatens to derail the entire macro agreement.
Finally, Section 5. Regional ripple effects, wider implications.
A really crucial detail here, one introduced directly by the U.S. president, is the push to drastically expand the Abraham Accords. If you recall, these were originally established during Trump's first term. They're basically diplomatic agreements designed to normalize political, economic, and security relations between Israel and various Arab nations like the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. Well, the U.S. administration now views the expansion of these accords as a necessary cornerstone of this whole new peace settlement.
The strategy is incredibly ambitious. The U.S. essentially wants Saudi Arabia and Qatar to immediately sign the Abraham Accords as a hard condition of the wider deal. They're linking the stabilization of the Gulf directly to the recognition of Israel. The U.S. president even floated a truly surprising idea, the Islamic Republic of Iran eventually joining the accords. I mean, tying a U.S.-Iran ceasefire to the historic normalization of ties between Israel and major regional powers is a massive diplomatic gamble. It could fundamentally stabilize the entire region, or the sheer weight of all these demands could just collapse the whole negotiation process.
And that brings us to the ultimate question. As diplomats race against the clock in Doha and Oman, and as military strikes continue to test the boundaries of a very fragile ceasefire, we have to ask ourselves, are we witnessing the blueprint for a lasting, historic peace that permanently reshapes the Middle East? Or are we just looking at a temporary, transactional pause in a much longer, inevitable war? The coming days will give us that answer. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning and always keep asking the big questions.